I gripped the steering wheel tighter, the remote bridge sight blurring ahead through sheets of water. This project was my lifeline. Design the span over the ravine, meet the deadline, or watch my career skid into the ditch. I'd driven 12 hours from the city, calculations looping in my head, but the storm whispered doubts. As I pulled up, thunder cracked, and there she was, Joss Reyes, the local builder, standing unmoved in the downpour, her crew scattering like leaves. Her eyes met mine, steady as rebar. I killed the engine, whispering to the empty cab, "I don't know how to stop." The floodwaters were rising. We had no choice but to start now. The wipers slapped rhythmically, but they couldn't clear the haze of fatigue settling in my bones. I'd left Boston at dawn, fueled by black coffee and the relentless tick of deadlines. Board meetings, revisions, the kind of pressure that carved lines into your face before 30. My laptop hummed on the passenger seat, blueprints for the bridge glowing in digital precision. Load-bearing angles, stress points, every variable accounted for. But out here, in this forgotten stretch of New England wilderness, nature didn't care about my spreadsheets. I eased the SUV down the muddy access road, tires churning gravel into slurry. The site emerged like a half-built skeleton, steel girders piercing the gray sky, the ravine below churning with runoff. Crew trucks hunkered under tarps, and there, directing them, was Joss. She wore oilskin pants and a faded flannel shirt, soaked through but moving with purpose, barking orders over the wind. Her dark hair was pulled back tight, face set in concentration, hands gesturing at a sagging beam. I parked and stepped out, rain immediately plastering my wool coat to my skin. The chill seeped in, but I straightened, clutching my portfolio like armor. "Dr. Arya Brady," I called, voice cutting through the roar. "Lead engineer." She turned, wiping mud from her cheek with the back of her hand. Up close, Joss was solid. Broad shoulders from years of hauling timber, eyes the color of wet slate, assessing me without a word. "Joss Reyes," she said finally, extending a calloused palm. Her grip was firm, lingering just a second too long, like she was testing the give in my resolve. We ducked under a canopy, the crew's chatter fading as they worked. I spread the blueprints on a makeshift table, the paper curling in the damp. The foundation needs recalibrating. These soil samples show erosion risks. We adjust the pilings by 15 degrees here. My finger traced the lines, precise as a scalpel. Joss leaned in, her breath warm against the chill, studying the diagram. "That'll work on paper, but the rock face shifts after rain like this. We've braced it, practically. Extra cross members, local timber. Your angles might snap under wind load." Friction sparked immediately, hot and immediate. "Practical?" I echoed, sharper than intended. "This is engineered for safety, not guesswork. One miscalculation, and the whole span collapses." She didn't flinch, just crossed her arms, rain dripping from her sleeves. "I've built bridges and worse. City plans look good until the ground fights back." Her voice was low, gravelly from shouting over machinery, but there was no anger, just that unflinching gaze, like she saw through my diagrams to the exhaustion underneath. The crew paused, glancing our way, but Joss waved them on. We stood there, inches apart, the air thick with unspoken measures. I caught the scent of her, earth and pine resin, mixing with the ozone. For a moment, her eyes softened, tracing the tension in my jaw, and I wondered if she saw the woman who'd skipped meals, slept in her office chair, chasing perfection to outrun the quiet failures back home. Thunder rolled again, closer. "Storm's worsening," Joss said, nodding toward the horizon. "Flood's coming up fast. No one's leaving tonight." I glanced at the road, already a river of mud. My phone had no signal, the city a world away. "Fine," I muttered, folding the blueprints. "We work through it." She nodded, a faint curve to her mouth. Not a smile, but acknowledgement. As we trudged to the trailer, her shoulder brushed mine, steady in the gale. Inside, the dim light flickered, and I felt the first crack in my control, the project's weight pressing heavier than the rain outside. Dawn crept in grudgingly, the storm's fury dulled to a persistent drizzle that turned the site into a slick maze. I woke in the trailer's narrow bunk, neck stiff from the thin mattress, the air thick with damp, and the faint tang of rusting metal. Joss had crashed on the floor, her sleeping bag rolled tight against the wall. But she was already up, coffee brewing on a hot plate. The mug she handed me steamed, black and bitter, cutting through the fog in my head. "Sky's clearing some," she said, peering out the grimy window. "Enough to work, if we're smart." I nodded, sipping fast, the heat grounding me. My blueprints lay spread on the table, annotated with last night's hasty notes. The flood had receded just enough, but the ravine still roared below, swollen and unforgiving. "We start with the beams," I said, tracing the diagram. "The east support's unstable. Calculations show a 5-degree shift in load distribution. We recalibrate now or risk the whole foundation." Joss set her mug down, arms crossing over her chest. Her flannel was dry now, sleeves rolled to reveal forearms corded from years of labor. "Recalculations take time we don't have. I've seen shifts like this before. Ground's too wet for precision digs. Let me show you." We stepped out into the gray light, boots sinking into mud that pulled at every step. The crew gathered, faces etched with the night's toll. But Joss directed them with quiet efficiency, pointing to the sagging beam that jutted over the edge. It groaned under its own weight, rivets straining like overtaxed muscles. I followed, portfolio tucked under my arm, heart picking up as the ravine yawned below. "Here," Joss said, kneeling by the base, her hands running along the steel, testing for give. "Feel that? It's not the angle, it's the flex. Your plans account for dry rock, but this is saturated. We brace it low, add a temporary strut from the local pine, holds better in wet." I crouched beside her, the cold metal biting through my gloves. "But the specs..." "Specs bend," she interrupted gently, not looking up. "Watch." She grabbed a pry bar from the nearby toolbox, muscles shifting under her shirt as she wedged it in, leveraging the beam back into alignment. The metal creaked, protesting, and I held my breath, numbers flashing in my mind, torque values, shear forces. It held. "Now you," she said, handing me the bar. Our fingers brushed, hers rough and warm against my chilled ones, and something tightened in my chest. I gripped it, mimicking her stance, but my arms trembled under the resistance. The beam fought back, unyielding, and sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill. Joss moved behind me without a word, her body close enough that I felt the heat radiating from her. "Like this," she murmured, her hand covering mine on the bar, guiding the pressure. Her other arm wrapped around my waist, steadying my hips, aligning my weight over the fulcrum. The contact was practical, instructional, her palm firm against my side, thumb pressing just above my hip bone to correct my lean. But up close, her scent enveloped me again. Sawdust and rain-soaked earth, steady as her breath on my neck. I pushed, the beam shifting incrementally, and a rush hit me. Not just the fix, but the way her touch anchored me, cutting through the calculations to something rawer. My pulse thudded, loud in my ears, and for a second, the world narrowed to that pressure, her voice low. "Steady. You've got it." We secured the strut, the crew hammering at home. But as they moved on, Joss stepped back, leaving the air cooler where she'd been. I straightened, hands shaking not from effort, but from the echo of her guidance, the way it exposed the fray in my edges. I'd built my life on control, equations that never lied, plans that locked chaos out. But here, with mud caking my boots and her gaze lingering, I felt the first real slip. She noticed, of course. In the quiet beat before the next task, she tilted her head. "You push like you're fighting yourself, too." I looked away, toward the ridge where shadows gathered, the sight's dangers sharpening as the drizzle picked up. Rock outcrops loomed unstable, ready to slide with the next gust. "It's how I get things done," I said, voice quieter than I meant. But the words hung, vulnerable, and she didn't press, just nodded, like she understood the weight beyond the work. The morning wore on, but that moment lingered, pulling me toward the escalating risks ahead, where control would mean survival for us all. The drizzle thickened into a steady patter by midday, turning the slope into a treacherous slide. We moved to the foundation work, where the crew dug pilings into the ravine wall, picks clanging against rock that crumbled too easily under the wet. Joss had the men positioned in pairs, ropes tethered to anchors, but the ground shifted with every strike, a low rumble building like distant thunder. I stood at the edge, Laptop open on a crate, running simulations. Shear strength dropping by 12% in saturated soil. Probability of slide at 47. My fingers flew over the keys, numbers blurring as the ravine echoed with warnings. "Pull back," I called, voice sharper than the wind. "The outcrop's unstable. Calculations show a cascade if we go deeper without shoring." Joss paused mid-direct, her hammer resting on her shoulder, sweat cutting tracks through the mud on her face. "We've braced the face already. Stopping now wastes the day." She gestured to the timber struts wedged into cracks, simple but solid, holding the rock in place like veins under skin. The crew hesitated, tools idle, eyes flicking between us. Rain drummed on my hood, soaking through, but I didn't move. "Those braces are temporary. My models predict failure under lateral pressure. Safety protocols demand full evacuation until we reinforce with steel mesh." She stepped closer, the space between us narrowing, her breath visible in the chill. "Protocols are for labs, Arya. Out here, the mountain decides. I've lost men to waiting too long." Her tone wasn't angry, but edged, like gravel under boot. The friction ignited, heat rising despite the cold, my precision clashing against her instinct, the air taut as a guy wire. One of the workers shifted uneasily, a young guy named Tomas, his pick trembling. "She's right about the slide, boss. Felt it give under me." Joss's jaw tightened, but she nodded once, sharp. "Fine, we brace your way. But if it slows us, that's on the clock." She turned to the crew, directing them to haul the mesh from the truck, her movements fluid, unyielding. I watched her, the way her shoulders rolled with purpose, cords of muscle flexing under wet flannel. And something stirred, admiration laced with resentment, her strength a mirror to my fraying edges. As they worked, the rumble grew, a deep groan from the rock face. Loose stones pattered down, then a slab the size of a door sheared free, tumbling toward Tomas. He stumbled, rope snapping taut, but the ground buckled beneath him. I lunged forward, heart slamming, but Joss was faster, diving across, shoving him clear as the rock crashed inches from her boot. Dust billowed, the crew shouting, and I scrambled over, my hand reaching for the edge where she'd fallen to one knee. She rose, brushing debris from her knees, face smudged but steady. My palm found hers to pull her up, but it shook. Tremors from the adrenaline, the near miss ripping through me. Calculations couldn't capture this, the raw edge of loss. Joss's fingers closed around mine, calluses rough against my skin, holding firm until the quake in my arm eased. Her touch lingered, thumb grazing my knuckle, grounding me in the chaos, her eyes locking on, gray and unflinching, seeing the fear I buried under formulas. "You all right?" she asked, low, just for me, the crew's voices fading behind. I nodded, swallowing hard, the warmth of her hand seeping into the cold knot in my chest. She'd moved without thought, body a barrier against the slide, her quiet strength not in words, but in the way she held space. Resilient, like the braces she'd fought for. It pulled at me, that steadiness, making my walls feel thin, the project's dangers mirroring the ones building inside. The sun dipped low as we secured the site, tarp snapping in the wind. "Night planning," Joss said, releasing my hand slow, the absence cool. "Trailer, we've got maps to sort before dark." I followed her gaze to the dimming ridge, the day's tensions coiling tighter, leading us into the long hours ahead. The trailer's door creaked shut behind us, sealing out the wind's howl but trapping the day's damp chill inside. Joss flicked on the single overhead bulb, its yellow light pooling over the scarred table where blueprints sprawled like veins across wood. We shrugged off soaked jackets, the air heavy with the scent of wet earth and instant coffee grounds. My muscles ached from the slide's scramble, but I couldn't sit yet. Spread the maps instead, fingers tracing fault lines that mirrored the cracks I felt forming. Joss poured from the thermos, steam curling between us as she slid a mug my way. Her knuckles brushed the table's edge, scarred from tools and time, and I caught myself staring. "Rough day," she said, settling into the chair opposite, her frame filling the space without crowding it. "But we held." I nodded, sipping the bitter heat, letting it burn down the tightness in my throat. The blueprints blurred under the dim glow, numbers swimming, stress loads I'd recalculated twice, safety margins shaved thin. It shouldn't be this close, I muttered, more to the paper than her. I build in buffers, always have. She leaned forward, elbows on the table, her shadow stretching across the diagrams. The light caught the fine lines at her eyes, etched from squinting into storms like today's. What drives that? The buffers, the fight against every shift? The question hung, simple but probing, and the trailer's walls pressed in, the ravine outside a distant rumble. I set the mug down, the thud echoing my pulse. You know that feeling, don't you? The one where control slips and you grip harder. I'd chased it since college, equations my shield after my parents' divorce splintered the house into silence. Dad's blueprints for impossible houses, Mom's endless lists to hold it together. I became both, the architect of plans that never failed, the engineer who fixed what broke. Promotions stack like girders, senior at 28, leading megaprojects by 32. But nights blurred into code, sleep stolen by what-ifs. Relentless, I said finally, voice low. It's how I prove I'm enough. One flaw and it all crumbles. Like today. Joss listened without interrupting, her gaze steady, not pitying but seeing. The way the light hollowed my cheeks, the tension coiling my shoulders. She nodded once, slow. Sounds heavy. Out here, it's different. You learn to bend or break. She shifted, pulling a worn notebook from her jacket pocket, pages yellowed and dog-eared. Flipping it open, she pointed to sketches, rough lines of beams and braces, notes in tight script. Grew up in this valley. Dad ran the mill till it shuttered, logs to lumber, hands bleeding for every board. I started hauling at 12, stacking pine that weighed more than me. Storms like today's? They took the bridge in '09, swept my uncle's truck into the ravine, buried him under silt. Her finger traced a faded photo taped inside. A younger Joss, arm around a broad man with the same slate eyes, both grinning beside a felled oak. The words landed quiet, but they carried the weight of years. Calluses from chainsaws, the ache of dawn shifts, winters where the cold seeped into bones and stayed. She'd rebuilt that bridge herself, she said, apprenticing under old-timers who taught feel over formulas. How timber sighs before it snaps. How rock holds secrets in its cracks. Local life shaped her. Hard labor's forging resilience. Not against the world, but with it. Losses piled too. The mill's closure scattering family, a partner who left when the hours swallowed weekends. You fight the current long enough, you learn to swim it, she finished, closing the book with a soft snap. Not stop, just flow. Her story pulled at me, the raw edges of it echoing my own drive, but softer, grounded in soil instead of screens. The trailer felt smaller, the space between us thinning as I leaned in, drawn by the vulnerability in her voice, the way her hands stilled, not clenched, but open. I'd armored myself against this, against sharing the fractures, but her words cracked something. You feel it too, that pull when someone's truth mirrors your hidden ones. My chest tightened, not from fear, but recognition. The relentless pace I'd built suddenly feeling like running from the very bends she embraced. Joss met my eyes then, unflinching. The bulbs hum the only sound. You're good at holding it up, Arya. But you don't have to alone. The admission lingered, my walls thinning under that gaze, the first real fissure showing. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the trailer. But inside, a shift settled, subtle, like a beam settling into place. We pored over the maps longer, plotting the next day's repairs, but my mind snagged on the urgency ahead. The swaying support structure demanding hands-on work, where plans met reality in ways I couldn't calculate alone. The next morning broke sharp, sunlight slicing through the clouds like a welder's arc. But the site's urgency hit harder. Joss spotted it first during the walkout. The main support structure swaying under a fresh gust, rivets popping like distant gunfire. The steel tower, key to anchoring the bridge deck, had twisted overnight from the storm's torque, its base groaning against the ravine wall. Crew voices hushed as we approached, the metals creak echoing my tightening gut. "Can't wait for the crane," Joss said, eyes narrowing on the lean. "Wind's picking up. We weld the cross brace now, manual, or it shears clean." I stared at the blueprints in my hand, useless against the live flex. My calculations screamed for evacuation, but the deadline loomed. 2 days to span the gap, or the contract dissolved, my career with it. Manual? That's not protocol. The arc welder's calibrated for stationary. Protocols won't hold this. Her voice cut steady, hand clamping my shoulder brief, grounding. "You know the theory. Time to learn the feel. I'll guide." The crew rigged a harness, tethering us to the tower's frame, the ravine dropping sheer below. Boots clamped to the narrow platform, wind whipping my hair. I gripped the welding torch Joss handed over. Its weight foreign, heavier than lead in my palm. The hood dropped over my eyes, world narrowing to sparks and shadow, the scent of ozone sharp as we sparked the rod. But my stance faltered, the flame dancing wild, metal spitting back heat that singed my gloves. "Too loose," Joss murmured from behind, her body shifting close. The platform dipped with our weight, but she pressed in, solid as the beam we fought to save. One arm wrapped my waist, palm flat against my side, fingers splaying to lock my hips square. Her touch burned through layers, flannel to skin, precise, adjusting the tilt of my torso with a nudge of her thigh against mine. "Breathe into it. Align here, like you're part of the steel." Her breath grazed my neck, warm against the chill gusts, and I felt the shift. Not just correction, but the way her body molded to mine, chest to back, steadying the tremor in my arms. The torch steadied under her guidance, her free hand covering mine on the grip, calluses rough over my knuckles, directing the arc in a clean bead. Sparks flew bright, fusing the brace, the sizzle drowning the wind. But inside, tension coiled tighter. Her thumb pressed just above my hip bone, holding me through the focus, and heat pooled low, unrelated to the flame. The weld held, glowing red, then cooling silver, but my pulse thundered louder. I lifted the hood, sweat slicking my face, and turned slight in her hold. Our eyes met inches apart, hers dark with the same unspoken pull, the ravine forgotten. "I don't know how to stop," I whispered, the words slipping out raw, not about the work, but the drive, the walls I'd built cracking under her touch. It wasn't plea or confession, just truth, hanging in the wind. Joss didn't release me right away. Her hand lingered on my waist, thumb tracing a slow circle, the contact electric, altering everything. The crew cheered below, oblivious, but between us, the dynamic shifted. Friction to something deeper, vulnerability exposed in the sway. She nodded once, voice low. "Maybe you don't have to. Not alone." We rappelled down slow, her rope beside mine, the echo of that moment clinging like weld smoke. The sight buzzed on, but I moved different, her steadiness a new variable in my equations, pulling me toward the fixes ahead. The platform's sway faded as our boots hit solid ground, the crew's hammers resuming their rhythm like a heartbeat settling. The weld gleamed under the climbing sun, holding the support firm. No groan, no lean, just quiet stability where collapse had loomed. Joss unclipped her harness first, coiling the rope with efficient loops, her movements deliberate. But I lingered, fingers fumbling the buckle. The fix had worked, averting the disaster my numbers had predicted. Yet the real shift pulsed in my veins, the imprint of her hand on my waist, a ghost pressure that warmed through denim, lingering like heat from the arc. I straightened, shaking out my arms, but the echo stayed. Her palm's firmness, the way it had aligned not just my stance, but something deeper, pulling at the threads I'd kept taut. The ravine air cooled my flushed skin, but inside, tension hummed, unspoken. Joss glanced over, wiping sweat from her brow with her forearm, her eyes catching mine brief before flicking away. "Solid work," she said, voice even, but the corner of her mouth lifted slight, acknowledgement without fanfare. The afternoon blurred into cleanup. Crew hauling scrap, me double-checking tolerances on the laptop, numbers aligning cleaner now. But every shift brought her into view, bending to secure a bolt, muscles shifting under damp flannel, or calling orders with that gravel tone that cut through noise. The contact replayed in quiet moments, her thigh against mine, breath on my neck, thumbs subtle press. It wasn't the danger that shook me, but the vulnerability it exposed. How her touch had steadied more than the torch, cracking the isolation I'd armored myself in. You know that feeling, don't you? When a simple hold reveals the ache you've ignored, leaving you raw under the surface. As dusk settled, painting the ravine in bruised purples, Joss nodded toward the trailer. Meal first. Can't plan on empty. The crew dispersed to their trucks, fires sparking in the distance, but we stayed, the site emptying around us. Inside, she heated canned stew over the hot plate, the scent of tomatoes and herbs filling the tight space, steam fogging the window. We ate from tin bowls at the table, spoons scraping in rhythm, the day's grime still on our hands. She broke the silence first, stirring her bowl slow. Lost my sister to a site like this. 10 years back, up in the hills. Fault line gave way during a pour. Concrete shift buried her quick. Her voice stayed level, but her eyes fixed on the steam rising, guarded, like sharing the words cost something. She was the planner type, like you, always sketching foundations that'd outlast storms. I was the one hauling mix, thinking feel-beat paper. After, I rebuilt alone. No more losses on my watch. The admission hung, her spoon pausing, the weight of it in the lines around her mouth, the way her shoulders carried old fractures. I set my bowl down, the metal warm under my palm. Her past mirrored mine in reverse, loss forging her resilience, while mine drove the endless chase. That explains the pushback, I said soft. You see the bends I try to straighten. She nodded, gaze lifting to meet mine, unflinching. And you see the risks I feel in my gut. The air thickened, not from the stew's heat, but the mutual pull, reliance weaving between us like rebar through concrete. We'd clashed, but now it bound, her instincts grounding my plans, my precision sharpening her fixes. I felt exposed then, the walls I'd built for control thinning under her steady look, the physical echo of her touch making vulnerability real, undeniable. Outside, thunder grumbled distant, the massive storm brewing on the horizon, threatening shutdown. We cleared the table, maps unrolling for the night, but the bond deepened in that shared quiet, acknowledgement that we needed each other, not just for the bridge, but to weather what came next. Thunder cracked like a snapped cable as the massive storm rolled in that night, winds howling through the ravine like they meant to tear the site apart. Rain lashed the trailer windows, turning the world outside into a black blur, the bridge's skeleton groaning under the assault. Joss and I bolted upright from the table, maps scattering as the structure shuddered, a deep, metallic wail that set my teeth on edge. Alerts blared on my phone, finally catching signal. Flash flood warnings, gale forces hitting 60, the whole operation facing shutdown. The deadline was tomorrow. One more delay and the funding vanished, my career with it. But evacuation? The road was already underwater, crew trapped with us. We reinforce now, Joss said, grabbing her jacket, her voice cutting through the roar without rising. Rain sheeted off her hood as she yanked the door open, pulling me after. The site was chaos, tarps ripping free, beams rattling in their cradles, the crew scrambling for cover. Lightning forked the sky, illuminating the ravine swollen to a torrent below. Josh shouted orders, herding them to the main span where the east tower buckled, wind twisting it like foil. I followed, boots sliding in mud, heart pounding against my ribs. My initial plans screamed retreat, secure the perimeter, wait out the peak. But the tower's lean grew, rivets popping free, and I knew waiting meant collapse. We tethered lines to the frame, the crew hauling steel plates against the gusts. Joss climbed first, harness biting into her waist, muscles straining as she wedged a brace into place. "Arya, up here," she called, voice barely audible over the gale. I clipped in, wind slamming my body against the cold metal, the drop below a churning void. Physical teamwork blurred into survival, her hands passing tools, my fingers numb but locking plates with her guidance. Sweat mixed with rain, stinging my eyes, endurance fraying as we fought the sway, bodies pressed close in the narrow gantry, her shoulder against mine, breath sinking in the storm's rhythm. The cold seeped deep, muscles burning, but we pushed, bolting the reinforcements one agonizing twist at a time. Then the decision hit. My plans called for full shoring, but the wind sheared a cable loose, whipping toward the crew below. "Defy it," Joss yelled, eyes locking on mine through the downpour. "Anchor low, use the ravine cables. It's riskier, but holds." It defied everything I'd calculated. Load paths rerouted, safety margins halved, but her gut read the flex, the way the steel sighed. I hesitated, wind howling my doubts, then nodded. "Do it." We rerouted on the fly, her hands steadying the winch as I fed the line, the storm pushing us to limits. Arms trembling, lungs raw, the metal vibrating under our grips like a live thing. In that grind, revelations cracked open. As lightning lit her face, slick and fierce, I saw my deeper fears mirrored. The terror of surrender, not just to the storm, but to this pull between us. I'd built walls against chaos, against needing anyone, after the divorce left me piecing myself from shards. But here, with her body shielding mine from a gust, I admitted it. Control was the lie. The real risk, losing her steadiness. "I'm scared," I gasped, voice lost in the wind, but landing between us, her hand finding my arm, squeezing through the wet. Of letting go. Of this ending in the mud. She held my gaze, unflinching. "Then hold on to me. We've got this." The tower stabilized as the last bolt locked, the storm's peak breaking like a wave. We descended slow, crew safe, the site battered but standing. Exhaustion hit hard, bodies spent, but the quiet aftermath settled, rain easing to a patter, the ravine calming, leading us toward the resolution waiting in the dawn. Dawn filtered through the thinning clouds, painting the ravine in muted gold as the crew assessed the damage. The bridge stood, battered but unbowed, beams locked, decks spanning the gap with a narrow margin that shaved hours off the deadline. Joss directed the final inspections, her voice carrying steady over the drip of residual rain, while I ran the last simulations on my laptop, numbers aligning just enough to sign off. The contract held. My career teetered back from the brink. But as the sun climbed, warming the mud underfoot, a different weight settled in my chest. Not relief, but the pull of the site, the valley's grip refusing to release me. We gathered tools in the quiet aftermath, the crew's chatter fading as trucks rumbled to life, heading out with nods and tired grins. Joss and I lingered by the east tower, the one we'd fought for in the gale, its fresh welds catching the light. I packed my portfolio slow, fingers tracing the edges, but my eyes snagged on the horizon where the road snaked back to Boston. Leaving meant returning to the glass offices, the endless revisions, the isolation of screens that calculated everything but this, the raw bend of working with someone who saw through the equations to the woman straining beneath. "I should go," I said, voice low, zipping the case with more force than needed. The words tasted wrong, like admitting defeat to the very control I'd chased. The sight blurred slight, not from fatigue, but the ache of it, how the storm had stripped me bare, her touch in the wind revealing the illusion I'd built my life on. Control wasn't the girders or the plans, it was the walls keeping chaos and connection out. Here, with mud caked on my boots and her presence solid beside me, I confronted it. I couldn't leave, not emotionally. Not when surrender felt like the first real stability. Joss turned from coiling the last rope, her hands pausing mid-loop, slate eyes meeting mine without flinching. She stepped closer, the space between us thinning to inches, her flannel brushing my arm. No words at first, just that gaze, unflinching, inviting the drop I'd resisted. It held the quiet strength of the braces she'd insisted on, the way she'd steadied me, not with force, but presence, seeing the fractures I hid under precision. You know that look, don't you? The one that strips away the armor, leaving you exposed but held. My breath caught, pulse thudding like the rain on tin, and I felt the walls crumble, the relentless drive yielding to something softer, truer. She reached out then, her hand finding my waist again, palm flat and warm through the damp fabric, echoing the weld's guidance, but lingering, deliberate. Fingers splayed, thumb pressing gentle into the curve of my hip, pulling me nearer until our breaths mingled, her scent of earth and pine wrapping around me. It sealed everything, the changed perspectives, her resilience mirroring my drive, but bending it toward trust. I leaned in, forehead resting against hers, brief, the contact intimate, electric, her touch a promise that surrender didn't mean loss. "Stay a little longer," she murmured, voice gravel soft, her free hand cupping my jaw, thumb grazing my lip. The gesture anchored me, heat blooming low, unspoken tension resolving into this. Two women forged in labor, finding home in the yield. We stood there as the sun rose higher, her hand sliding to intertwine with mine, calluses rough against my skin, the ravine's hum fading to a whisper. Reflection hit quiet. The illusion of control shattered, replaced by the truth that real strength lay in the bend, in relying on the one who steadied you through the storm. The project was done, but this emotional truth lingered, pulling us toward whatever came next, grounded and unyielding. Our hands lingered in the post-project quiet, fingers laced as the last truck faded down the road. If you've ever surrendered control and found something real, share that moment below. Subscribe for more stories of quiet intimacies that shift everything.